We have a few minutes for questions from the audience to the participants, if there are any. Yes, Jane.
Yeah, it's not easy to put her ideas into images. And if you're teaching young people about her thought, I thought they were just terrific. And then also, Karen, that was top notch. I really liked you're bringing in the connection with Eddie Hillesum. So I have a question. It doesn't really have an answer, but since you brought them both up, I thought I'd ask for your reflection. Both Eddie Hillesum and Simone Weil, surrounded by chaotic, torturous situations, managed to create that envelope, a bit of silence, and survive, and wrote about it so beautifully. So here's the question. I don't really think you have an answer, but just reflections. What allowed them to do that, do you think, with Eddie Hillesum and Simone Weil?
Well, I think I might have quite a disappointing reflections. I think it was just a very specific material condition for both of them. Like, Etty Hillesum wrote most of her diary in Amsterdam, where, well, she actually lived still in a home and still had enough to eat and still had time. And she writes about it a lot in some bewilderment. How can it be that she still has these things and how helpful they are? And yet she also knew very clearly, and probably more than other people around her, how terrible and unstoppable were the things that were happening at the time. So, I mean, maybe the question, the unanswerable question for me would be more like, what allowed them to see the disaster while they still had room to write in, and not just after being cast out to the cold or whatever. And I don't know the answer to this one.
Daniel, your talk seemed extremely convincing and well developed. However, the ending seems so counterintuitive to everything that we think about with Weil. Seeing that experience, in fact, her experience in rhythm, which for her is dehumanizing, as at all aesthetic and at all positive, it seems totally counter to every other way she spoke about that experience in almost all of the other works. So it's shocking. So I'd love to hear some more about the shock value of what you've said.
Actually, I'd like to add to this question, because I think that, from your quote from Conditions premières du travail de S.Weil, actually, at least what I remember that she says is that the idea that if the worker does, kind of monotonic motion, okay, which is repetitive, like a valve, for instance, okay, it is only if the worker then remembers that actually it's a projection on the one dimension of the two-dimensional circular movement, okay, which is divine, okay, then, okay, it is a way to get away from, from what Christine said, okay, the thing that prisons us as workers. At the same time, yeah, I found your conclusion very, provocative, but interesting also, because I think that there is, I think, as you said, something in what the way Weil describes art as, there's maybe a tempting element. I think that's something that Alice Menison also talked about, which is maybe a kind of metaxu, maybe a kind of, something meditating. Okay, so I think we've already asked you too much. So
look, I could be wrong. There's no guarantee that I'm right in any of it. But I think the references that I am basically focusing on a select number of passages from the Conditions premières essay. And what she writes there is striking in the way that it brandishes, it uses those terms. She falls back on rhythm, on harmony. She describes it. She relays it almost like a choreography, like a dance. When you compare it to the earlier essays on Renaud, which are today I've made, this week I've made 10 francs. Last week I've made 8 francs, and so on and so forth. This is really alienated work. This is good old anti-capitalism, whatever. But her 1940s essay are written in completely different tone, completely different. And the object, of course, is very different. She tries to envision a more positive type of work, a non-alienated work, but she still maintains this very, very basic division of labor, I find. She's not a Marxist in this sense. She doesn't want to do away with division of labor. I think. Maybe I'm wrong. But in this essay, I think it stands out quite clearly that what she looks for is to take a step back and to look at the processus de travail, at division de travail, in aesthetic terms. It's not a new. It goes back a century at least. Proudhon describes it, and so on. It's an old thing. It's an old notion. And I think she taps into this tradition in a very distinct way.